Let's get into
Vice
this.
President Kamala Harris is wrapping up her first international trip today in Mexico. She earlier visited Guatemala in a bid to stem migration from the countries of the so-called Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Nick Schifrin is back now with a look at Harris's trip and the thorny issues she and the administration are trying to manage.
Y a la excelentísima señora Kamala Harris.
In Mexico City this morning, a united front, flanked by Vice President Harris and Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. The U.S. and Mexico agreed to help develop the so-called Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, home to 65% of migrants who try and make it to the U.S.
The United States and Mexico have long-standing relationships.
Mexico and the U.S. don't always agree on the tactics, but they share a goal of reducing migration by targeting root causes. Violence. The Northern Triangle has homicide rates among the highest in the world. Poverty. The region's among the poorest in the Western Hemisphere. In Guatemala, that's produced hunger. The country has the world's 6th highest rate of chronic malnutrition. And so far this year, more unaccompanied Guatemalans have tried to enter the U.S. than from any other country.
The President and I also discussed the root causes of migration, in particular, the lack of economic opportunity for many people here in Guatemala.
Harris spent yesterday with Guatemalan President Alejandro Yamatei, whom she's not meeting on this trip, reveals another root cause: bad governance and corruption. Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez is considered by U.S. law enforcement a key player in drug trafficking, and Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele is considered increasingly authoritarian. In Guatemala, Harris announced a U.S. anti-corruption task force and said better governance can convince families to stay home.
Hope does not exist by itself. It must be coupled with relationships of trust. It must be coupled with tangible outcomes in terms of what we do as leaders.
The question is no longer what can we do for the hemisphere? It's what can we do with countries in the hemisphere together.
But Harris isn't the first vice president to try and tackle root causes. When he was vice president, Joe Biden presented the U.S. as a partner to tackling the same regional issues, and many of those issues have become more intractable. So on this trip, Harris also had a more immediate message.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come.
Border Patrol is detaining more people at the U.S.-Mexico border than at any point in 20 years. Republicans criticize the Biden administration for ending Trump-era programs to deter migrants, and criticize Harris for not visiting the border, which she tried to deflect today on NBC.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I mean, I don't understand the point that you're making. I'm not discounting the importance of the border.
The Biden administration describes its border policy as more humane. Today, it revealed that from July 1st, 2017 to January 20th, 2021, 3,913 children were separated from their families. So far, 45% of those children have been confirmed reunited. Harris admits there's not going to be a quick fix to this problem.
We have to look at not only what is actually happening at the border, but what is causing that to happen.
For more, I'm joined by Eduardo Gamarra. He is a political science professor at Florida International University. He has served as a consultant to several heads of government in the Americas. Professor Gamarra, welcome to the NewsHour. As we mentioned in the piece, this is not a new approach trying to tackle the root causes of migration. Do you think there's anything that distinguishes Vice President Harris's approach from previous attempts?
Well, I think the fact that the causes are recognized at the beginning is something new, and that we're not just dealing with, a very, very quick response, trying to get, more than anything, a political response to this major crisis. So addressing the root causes is important as a policy statement. The problem is that the root causes cannot be solved overnight. They can't be solved during one administration, and as we know, this kind of goes back even as far back as President Reagan.
Absolutely. The vice president has talked a little bit about the private sector, emphasizing that. But at the end of the day, this plan, this approach requires working with the governments of the Northern Triangle. Are those governments reliable partners?
Well, the fact is that democracy in Central America is facing some very serious challenges. It has challenges that are both structural and, as we might say in Spanish, conjunctural, right? They're crises of the moment. So you have everything from climate change to the problems of violence to the problems of low growth and the problems of the pandemic. And on top of that, you have declining confidence in government, declining confidence in institutions, and declining confidence, above all, in the politicians that are governing those countries.
More specifically, as we mentioned, she chose Guatemala because basically it was the only government that she could be seen with. Are there people in Guatemala who will work with her compared to some of the real problems at the very top that we've seen in Honduras and El Salvador?
And Guatemala has a private sector president who has made some overtures to the United States and who has been at least open enough to allow the vice president to arrive there and even push the idea that the assistance to Guatemala should not be to the government, but to the private sector and to civil society.
Do you think that these leaders, whether Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador, are willing to achieve the structural reforms that we all know are necessary to tackle the root causes?
Well, to address those structural reforms, what needs to occur is a long-term investment by the United States and others. This is not something that those countries have the capacity to do. So structural reform means, for example, creating productive economies. To create productive economies, you need long-term investment, primarily from the American private sector or from the Europeans. That isn't going to occur if the conditions aren't right there.
Talk to some experts who say this discussion, what the vice president is focused on, is all well and good, but if you are going to tackle the immediate crisis of migrants at the border now, the Biden administration needs to do better to enforce U.S. law to create a deterrence. Do you agree?
I agree, and I think the vice president went down there with part of that message. Don't come to the United States because we, in fact, do not have open borders. But yet, at the same time, we do have a crisis on the border, and people keep coming. And so there is a need to address those structural issues that are generating, this enormous move of people all the way from Venezuela, by the way. They're coming up, they're using Central America to arrive in the United States. But at the same time, we also need to work with those governments in those countries in the development of better ways to enforce whatever is immigration law there and immigration law here.
And I wonder if in this moment there's another approach, another thing that the U.S. can also focus on to try and achieve this relationship the vice president's talked about, and that is vaccines, COVID vaccines, something that she has discussed with every leader in the region.
And I think, that this is an opportunity for the United States. The U.S. has essentially lost leadership in Latin America over the last couple of decades. And I think the COVID pandemic, in fact, gives the United States a unique opportunity to regain leadership in the region. And beginning in Central America might be the right place to do it.
Eduardo Gamarra, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Are we seeing an Obama 3.0 White House? Many Americans naturally wonder if Joe Biden is truly calling the shots within the Oval Office, spurring reasonable suspicion that this administration unfolds as Barack Obama's third term.
And Obama himself, he fueled some of that suspicion with a recent interview. He's been very active in the media lately, far more active than Joe Biden is, that's for sure. Last night, he made some pretty outrageous claims on television. Barack Obama had a chance to become an historic healer, a transformational leader for America. Instead, he chose to be the divider in chief. Now, his election, it marked an incredible achievement, both for him individually and for our country. A country that once considered black men to be property, elevated one to the highest office in our land, the most powerful position on planet Earth. But Obama leveraged that historic mantle for political power, and he stoked division, including last night during his embarrassing interview over on CNN. He took to the airwaves once again to demonize his political opponents and to stir up racial strife with needless, baseless attacks. Part of the paradox here is that when Obama assumed the presidency, CBS New York Times polling showed that 66% of Americans viewed race relations as good. America had reached a place where our law and our culture no longer permitted any systemic racism, and we built a largely post-racial nation, as evidenced in part by Obama's very own win. But rather than heal, coalesce, and unite, Obama and his then Vice President Joe Biden, what did they do? Well, they embarked on a campaign of disunion. In their words and in their policies, they fanned the flames of dissent and discord with disastrous consequences. By the time they left office, that same poll on race relations, it had entirely flipped. By 2016, 69% of Americans reported race relations were bad. Again, at the beginning of the term, 66%, two-thirds, said race relations were good. By the end, 69% said race relations were bad, after having the first black president serve in the Oval Office. For a look at just how poorly Obama and Biden performed during their tenure in the White House, let's get to the numbers in a Chalk Talk. Focusing here on the economic side of things, on prosperity for minorities, and contrasting the actual record of Obama and Biden versus Donald Trump. First, let's look at Obama. During his 8 years in the White House, blacks lost a staggering 30% of their household net worth. Now, I'm not trying to cherry pick and penalize him. He inherited a brutal recession, to be sure, in 08-09, but they had 8 long years to rebuild. Now, the upper end did rebuild and then some. The already successful, those were salad days for them, the top 1%. But for the American strivers, including minorities, it was an incredibly tough slog. The first black president in American history led to a terrible loss of household wealth for minorities. Now, let's move on to Donald Trump and look at his record. During the first 3 years of his administration, before the CCP virus crashed the global economy, an amazing 5.2 million total jobs were created. And this number is even more amazing. 4.5 million of them, they went to minorities. This data is courtesy of the Washington Post, by the way, not an organization trying to make Donald Trump look good. 86% of the jobs he created during the first Trump boom, they went to minorities. Minorities are about a third of the country, and yet they got almost all of the job gains in those first 3 years. So as these numbers show, if Donald Trump is a racist, he's remarkably bad at it. Perhaps in part because of these numbers, blacks and Hispanics increasingly rally to the America First movement. And given the Democrats' loss of political capital among voters of color, perhaps it's unsurprising then that Obama took to his friendliest network, CNN, to come down on political opponents as racists.
I also think that there are certain right-wing media venues, for example, that monetize and capitalize on stoking the fear and resentment of a white population that is witnessing a changing America and seeing demographic changes, and do everything they can to give people a sense that their way of life is threatened and that people are trying to take advantage of them.
Wow. But who has the actual history of stoking fear and resentment regarding race, Barack? Let's look at Obama's actual record and his rhetoric. During his candidacy in 2008, Obama came down hard on the working class.
They get better and they cling to guns or religion or antipathy towards people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment, or anti-trade sentiment. A way to explain their frustrations.
That sure sounds a lot like stoking and resentment to me. It was indeed Obama's basket of deplorables moment. But then after he won, we thought maybe he would temper the language. No, instead he ramped up the discord. He brought race into seemingly every discussion, and he infused it into every possible policy debate. In an interview encouraging Hispanics to vote Democratic, he said, quote, "We're going to punish our enemies." Our enemies. Thankfully, Hispanics ignored his toxic rhetoric. How disappointed Barack must have been to see so many Hispanics cross over to the, quote, enemy side in 2020 and vote for America first. More recently, in a clear condemnation of Trump, Obama said, quote, we should soundly reject language coming out of the mouths of any of our leaders that feeds a climate of fear or hatred or normalizes racist sentiments. This refrain from Obama is as consistent as it is detestable. My opponents are wrong on policy because they're racist. And if you don't see it that way, my way, well, then you're racist too. He also used last night to once again spread the most malignant lie in American public life, the Charlottesville Fine People hoax. Here's what he told Anderson Cooper, who, of course, would not dare to challenge Obama on this clear slander.
It's a problem if we have a president who's saying that, you know, neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville, they're good people on both sides. You know, that's a little bit beyond the pale.
President Trump never praised neo-Nazis nor any bigots at Charlottesville.
You know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally.
But Obama is not one to let the facts get in the way of his narrative, including the facts of his own disastrous results for minority Americans when he and Biden were in power. The reign of Obama was incredible for one black man, that's to be sure. He and his family, they enjoy generational wealth now, and they live a life apart from the harsh reality that his failed leadership and his harmful rhetoric produce.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.
New Reports MAGA Congressman Matt Gaetz explored retiring from Congress on the very day that the federal sex crime probe involving him first broke in the news. This is a total contrast from his recent public posture, vowing not to resign and to run for re-election in the wake of a probe that already convicted his longtime ally.
Well, I think that there's a lot going on in Florida. My focus is on what's going on here in Washington.
Are you concerned you'll be indicted?
No.
Gaetz has also been raising money for re-election, but new reports suggest this may actually be his plan B, because he approached far-right TV network Newsmax for a job, Axios reporting he was rejected. Now, the timing is especially striking because news first broke about the sex crimes probe back on March 3rd. Now, when reporters are working on stories, especially really big ones, they virtually always check with the key subjects in the story before publication. You do that to get information. Sometimes you get a comment or even a denial, and you include that in the final story. That means that subjects have a pretty good idea when a story about them is about to break. That's usually the case. And keep that in mind, because it was just hours before this story broke on March 30th that Gaetz began floating the idea of retiring from Congress altogether, pursuing a job at Newsmax. That's according to 3 sources who spoke to Axios. Now, for someone like Gaetz, conservative media was already part of his job. He rode his antics and a constant loyalty to Trump to already basically compete with a lot of analysts at Newsmax and Fox for most appearances.
I believe Matt Gaetz before I believe the FBI.
We need Newsmax in the halls of Congress.
Man, I've been trying to get you on for a long time. I'm glad you're here.
And I'm glad that viewers on Newsmax actually get the truth.
You've been on the show a bunch of times.
Most politicians would not do this. They may bow down. You're not.
Congressman, always good to see you. Welcome back.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, a hero during the impeachment hearings and beyond.
Newsmax has talk that is the truth and has breaking news. Both of those things can be very threatening to folks in Congress.
A hero. Well, who wouldn't want to work with a hero? While Newsmax was evidently willing to have him on air repeatedly for programming, they say publicly that does not mean they plan to actually work with him, working together daily. And they're not being very subtle about this rejection right now, publicly confirming, quote, Newsmax has had no plans to hire Representative Gates. The outlet, which often criticizes traditional news, made a point of confirming that one to the traditional news wire service, Reuters. Now, Gates has not been charged with a crime. And Newsmax, as you just saw, has often been taking his side in public. They just apparently don't want to be on his side at work in the days to come. Newsmax clearly following some wisdom from Dolly Parton, who said, "You're known by the company you keep. You say you're doing nothing wrong. I don't believe you are. I'm only trying to help you, sis, before you go too far." And as Dolly's refrain goes in that song, and as Newsmax might be trying to toe the line with Mr. Gates, she also said, quote, "I'm not accusing you of anything, but you're known by the company you keep." And that brings us to a contemporary version of the same classic warning. A$AP Rocky telling everyone, bad company's bad for your company. And Newsmax is a company, a corporation that apparently doesn't want company, in the terms of this employee, like Matt Gaetz.
Like and subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you get notifications anytime I go live and make a video. Make sure you still subscribe to my channel, like this video, comment on this video, share this video.